Well, good morning to all of you. We're so happy that you've decided to spend your Sunday morning with us for the next hour, and we are just so pleased to have you. And today what I want to think about is this idea that we have all probably been familiar with this idea of living in the moment, right? We hear this again and again to don't rush things, take time to really understand your surroundings, be mindful of what's happening. And if you're a Generation Xer like me, we have lived with Ferris Bueller's words in our lives the whole time, saying life moves pretty quick. You should stop and look around or you might miss it. And while that's a really good sentiment, what about when times maybe are hard? Maybe when you're experiencing seasons that you want to kind of rush through a little bit. I'll be honest, we had the cars over for dinner last week, and a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and I was like, I do not wish for those days again. People always used to tell me, you'll want those days back. I have a 12-year-old or two 12-year-olds and a 16-year-old, and I am very happy to not be living those days. There are some seasons that are just hard. There are some seasons where we feel frustrated, annoyed, disappointed, or maybe we just feel like we're living in the mundane dailiness of our worlds, and it's really just kind of meh. Or what if we have actually something really good to look forward to, like a new chapter unfolding, a wedding, or the welcoming of a new baby, or the next chapter of your life, like going off to college, or I'm a little too young for this, but retirement. People keep asking me, how many years do you have? And I say, too many to count. But see, we are wired to both live in the here and the now, but we're also wired to hope for the future, to hold the tension of both of those things as we work in and out our lives and as we work out our faith. So we're in the middle, we're ending a series called Breathe, where the preaching team, we all got together and we thought, gosh, this is going to be a season where school has just started, amped up, things are busy, holidays are coming, we're kind of smack dab in these few weeks of the tension of the election, and we thought, what would be good is just everybody could just breathe. So Cable talked us through what it means to breathe through our faith. Last week, Paul talked to us about what it means to love intentionally. And my name is Kristen Farrell, if you don't know me yet, and I'm part of the preaching team here, and that's what we're going to look at. We're going to look at hope this week. So let me give you a little word picture of what hope might look like. As I mentioned, I have 2 boys. I have twin boys, and they just started middle school. This was their middle school year. They're 6th graders. And 2 months ago when they started school, they were really excited, but they were also really nervous, right? It's a lot of newness. It's a lot of unknown. New building, new teachers, who's going to be in my classes. As my son Sawyer put it, at Union Pleasant, Mom, people knew me. I already had a good reputation. I've got to start that all over again? And I was like, yes, at the ripe age of 12, you need to start that all over again. But here's the thing. Through that anxiousness of that week, they had the fall retreat to look forward to. So if you've been here before, you know that our fall retreat is kind of legendary here at Revive. It's when the youth get together for a weekend and they have games, they have fun, they have paintball, they have zip lining. They also have really meaningful speakers. They have beautiful times of worship. And it has been part of our church rhythm is just almost like you can guarantee that a kid will have a great time if they go to the fall retreat. And so they had this week of school, but they knew on the weekend that they had the fall retreat. And somehow, knowing that they had that to look forward to, made that week, those unknowns, so much more bearable. Because that's what hope does for us. Hope gives us a new perspective. It gives us perseverance to suffer through in a way where we might not be enjoying the seasons of our life, when you have hope of something ahead. So today we're actually going to do an interesting thing. We're going to use a series of scripture that's about faith to actually explore the idea of hope. So we're going to be turning to Hebrews 11, and this Hebrews 11 is usually considered the hall of faith. It's that place in Hebrews where it talks about all these important figures from the Old Testament. And if you were a Jew reading this at the time, each name, each person mentioned would have brought to you stories of faith. miracles, supernatural things happening, God showing up. And so we're going to do that. We're going to look at these individuals of faith to see how that can give us hope. The other thing about chapter 11 is that if we look at the whole context of Hebrews, we can understand that Hebrews was written this way, and I'm going to read it because I don't want to miss it. That chapter 11 is crucial for the argument of Hebrews because it gives a clear and profound awareness of the redemptive history of our relationship with God as it culminates into the redemption of Jesus. So I'm going to read that again. It gives us a clear and profound awareness of the redemptive history of our relationship with God as it culminates to the redemption of Jesus. So in other words, it gives us concrete evidence that God was working in the past and continues to work in new ways in the present and in the future. And that truth will be evident today. You see, in the Old Testament, they always had the promise of protection, of redemption, of refuge, of care, of deliverance. But the followers of Jesus, it would be our natural next step to see that all play out through Jesus Christ. And so if you're here today as a visitor, I just want to pause and say that I'm glad you're here today. Maybe some of you have been here for a couple weeks and you're still figuring this stuff out. I hope even as you listen today that this concept of hope will bolster your encouragement as we continue to move forward. So quickly as we go, though, I want to make a distinct difference between faith and hope because they are very closely related, but they're also very distinct. So when Cable took us through this a couple weeks ago, he gave us this definition that faith is to believe that based on the past, God's past action, that we can trust him into the future. Right? So God's past action gives us trust for the future. So faith is kind of like more of an intellectual belief, whereas hope is anticipation and expectation that God will fulfill those promises. So we have faith that's grounded in the past, and then we have hope that is looking to the reality of the future. Hebrews 11:1 says, "Now faith is confidence in what we hope for, and assurance about what we do not see." And if I want to be really practical for a minute, and I think that's really important to do, we have an enemy of hope. It's so easy to be hopeless with the world that we live in 2024, and really the world that has existed for ages, right? And some of us can see that enemy to hope is cynicism. Being cynical, being sarcastic, kind of being bitter and resentful. And I love the way commencement speaker Maria Popova said it in a commencement speech at the University of Pennsylvania in 2016. She says this: "Today the soul is in dire need of stewardship and protection from cynicism. And the best defense against it is vigorous, intelligent, sincere hope. Not blind optimism, because that too is a form of resignation, to believe that everything will work out just fine and we need not apply ourselves." She says that cynicism in its passivity and resignation is a hardening, a calcification of the soul, and hope is a stretching of its ligaments, a limber reach for something greater. I love that idea. Well, I love the idea of a calcification of our hearts, but that's what I see, right? That's what cynicism does, as opposed to hope, who can just help us stretch a little bit more, right, than being hardened. And so to remember to look forward to our hope, we need to look back into the past. And that's what Hebrews 11 does with Abraham and Sarah. So if I tried to summarize Abraham and Sarah, their story starts in Genesis 12 and goes all the way to Genesis 25. I don't think we would make kickoff if I did that. So I'm going to just do a quick overview in case you're not familiar with Abraham and Sarah. Abraham and Sarah lived a tough life of hoping, waiting, and faithfulness. You see, God had promised to Abraham that his descendants would be far-reaching, that his descendants would outnumber the stars in the sky and the grains in the sand. And yet, God was making this promise through 100 years of infertility. 100 years of infertility, where they hoped and they prayed and they waited on God's promises. Well, ultimately, if you know the story, Sarah was able to give birth, but only after they had tried different things. Sarah even had offered up her servant and thought maybe the descendants would come not through her. But again, ultimately, they were able to conceive a boy named Isaac, which then Abraham was called to sacrifice, and that was crazy. But then they found a ram so he wouldn't have to. Is this all coming back to you, this story? But through it all, they experienced famine, prosperity, devastation, and ultimately the promise of God's hope. They had enduring hope for decades. And just as a side, one of the things that I find so inspiring about Abraham and Sarah is as they aged, their hope became stronger. As they aged, they had more capacity to hope because they had more instances of seeing God's goodness. And I just love that as an aside. I mean, as I get older and older, it is so easy to fall into that trap of losing hope and not remembering God's goodness to be more hopeful. I think it's a good cautionary tale to those of us as we're getting older, right, to know that we have some capacity for hope. And so we're going to look at the promises that God gave to Abraham. So if we'll jump in now, seeing what hope can give us, we're going to look at Hebrews 11, 8 through 10, which says this. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. You see, what hope gives us a home when we feel untethered. Home when we feel like a stranger in a foreign land. And it's pretty obvious sometimes, right, when someone's not from around here. I just had a transfer student, a senior, come into my homeroom, and he's not from around here. Here's why. About 17 times a day he calls me miss. Hello, miss. Good morning, miss. Thank you, miss. Goodbye, miss. He says miss all the time. And although I love it, I know that it's evident that he is not from around here. Because when you're not from around the country, right, when you're not around from your homeland, you might act differently. Your mannerisms might be different. Your dress may be different. Your speech might be different. What entertains you might be different. And the truth is, the reality is that as Christians, this is not our permanent home. We are strangers in a foreign land that has a home to look forward to. You see, Abraham knew that home here was temporary, all of it. And that can be really disorienting to us because we want to feel like we belong. We want to feel like we fit in. And that's evident as we search for meaning in sports teams and in politics and in careers and in our family. But the truth is that as followers of Christ, we actually won't ever fit in. We will walk around this world feeling like we're wearing a tuxedo to a rodeo, right? It'll just feel off. Or like we're wearing our painting clothes and like those third pair of sneakers, right, that you don't throw out yet, you just wear them to keep mowing in, right? We'll have our painting clothes and our mowing sneakers and we'll show up to a 5-star restaurant. We will always feel a little bit untethered because we are not wired for this place. So if you're feeling off, let me encourage you, that is normal. That is normal as followers of God. So how can we stay anchored? We keep our eyes forward. That is what hope is. Hope gives us a vision for a future home when we feel untethered. And what else can hope do? Well, we'll continue. In Hebrews 11, 11 and 12 says this, and by faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. And so from this one man, and he as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sand on the seashore. Because hope gives us the promise that we matter. Hope gives us value in who we are as people. I love this. I cannot imagine the utter desperation that Sarah felt week after week, month after month, year after year. Get this, decade after decade of not being able to bear children. If any of you have gone through something like that, where you're just hoping for something and you continue to get let down again and again, you know that it is utterly filled with despair and disappointment. And yet, even Sarah, even Kristen Farrell, even you matter to God. I'm sure that there are moments when Sarah doubted. In fact, we know that. We see that Sarah laughed when she was promised an heir. We see that she doubted, but she never lost that picture of hope that she had based on God's faithfulness and how he had been faithful in the past. I am sure that she had moments when she thought, you know what, maybe God's promises are for that guy over there. Maybe it's just for Abraham. Maybe God's promises aren't actually for me. I'm sure she must have felt that way. And yet, after 100 years of waiting, she was given hope through the form of a child. The hope in the form of a child. And so I want to encourage you today that God sees you. You may feel undervalued. You might feel underappreciated. You might be waiting, when is God going to use me? I have so much to give. When will I be able to matter in God's story? And let me tell you right now that you do matter in God's story. He is weaving together a tapestry bigger than the proportions that we could even matter, that we could even imagine. Even Sarah, even you. Hope gives us value in who we are. So we know that hope gives us a home. We know that hope gives us a value. It gives something else too. Hebrews 11:13 through 15 said this. All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. There it is again. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had the opportunity to return. What does that mean? What does hope gives us? Hope gives us permission to let go of the past instead of focusing on the past. Sometimes the way we perseverate on the past steals our hope. And we can understand why, right? There are sometimes we get stuck in nostalgia, and so it's a good stuck in the past. But we have those moments when we think, well, when the country was run better, or when my babies were little, things were easier, or when I was younger, I could do this. And we get stuck in the nostalgia of the past, and it actually steals our hope for the future. And then sometimes we get stuck in like the bad things of the past, right? Things that we've done wrong, things that we can't get over in ourselves, past sin or past regret. But the result is still the same. We get stuck in the past. We need to learn to let go of that. Sometimes we get stuck because of other people's sins, other people's bad behavior. And guess what? If we keep looking back, we have the opportunity to return. Again and again and again and again. And we play over comments and conversations and experiences that we endured, and that takes away our ability to hope. We need to have the freedom that hope gives us to let go of the past. Now, I want to be really clear about this. I'm not trying to minimize anybody's trauma. I'm not trying to excuse bad behavior, because that is not what you need to do as a path forward, right? We really care about healing at Revive. We have so many ministries here that will help you. I was just talking to Paul about it, and he said, I think therapy and counseling is one of the most underrated things. He said it is so vital for people to get through, to be able to have that hope. So please hear that. But when we stay in the past, whether good or bad, we just get stuck. Looking forward is impossible when we always keep looking in the past. I don't know if you've heard that. I think it's kind of corny, but it is also applicable, right? You could never drive your car if you're only looking in the rear view mirrors. And so we need to embrace that hope that gives us. So hope can give us a home. Hope can give us value that we matter. Hope can give us freedom from the past. But what is it that these pillars of faith knew that we don't know? Was there some like secret sauce, right? Because we can hope for sunshines, puppy dogs, unicorns, and rainbows our whole lives. But if it is not substantiated in something tangible, we will never have the enduring hope that God has for us. What about their hope was so sustaining, so fortifying, so tangible? And it's in this, as we continue to look at Hebrews 11:16, that says this: instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. So instead, right, instead of looking back at the old countries, old homes, old memories, old insecurities, old comforts of the world, instead of looking back to find a map, Abraham didn't even know where he was going and he still obeyed. So instead of looking for the answers, instead of looking for a home to feel like we must belong here, instead of those things, they knew there was something better. They had a choice to make. A choice to believe, to think instead that this idea isn't just a nice platitude, but it is a promise. It is an enduring promise that God gives us. And it's a promise for something better, right? Abraham says that he was looking forward to a city with stronger foundations than we have here, stronger foundations than anything we could build for ourselves. And that it was heavenly, right? That it was, he earlier admitted we were strangers because, again, we don't belong here. There's something that's heavenly waiting for us. And again, going back to that idea of being disorienting, I'm going to Philly for Thanksgiving, and my sister and I love to cook together. And I'm a pretty good cook. I'm like very adept in the kitchen, except when I go to her house. Right? Because like I know the ingredients, I know the recipes, I've done it all before, but I'm like, where's the spatula and the garlic? Right? Or maybe you've experienced do you ever drive somebody else's car, or maybe even a spouse's car? You know how to drive for sure, I bet you do, right? You know that you need a windshield wiper and a blinker, but sometimes when you sit in somebody else's car, it feels like you're 16 all over again, right? Guys, we are not meant for here. We are meant for heaven. We are meant for eternity, right? We could do things a million times, but we need to live with the hope to remember that this world is not our home, that this side of eternity, things may not ever be settled. This side of eternity, not every wrong is going to be righted. It is okay if you feel off. But you need to know that we can be seeking a better homeland, a heavenly country, because nothing in this life will give us the hope that Jesus can. It's only God's gift of faith that will give us a better option in another way. In 1 John 2:24-25, it says for this: as for you, see that what you have heard from the beginning remains in you. If it does, you also will remain in the Son and in the Father, and this is what he promised us, eternal life. We have hope because we have the promise, not the platitude, of eternal life. It isn't just a nice pipe dream. It isn't just a possibility. It is what God is preparing for us, a strong city with firm foundations that will be everlasting as this stuff passes. This is so temporary, even though it doesn't feel like it. Think about my grandma. She always used to say, this too shall pass, and I thought it was so biblical, although it's not in the Bible actually at all. I just think it sounds old-timey because it says shall. But the truth is that this too shall pass, and there is something better. Now, some of you might have heard the phrase, oh, they're too heavenly minded to be any earthly good. Have you heard that phrase? That was another thing my grandma said too. But I love how C.S. Lewis puts it in Mere Christianity. He says this: a continual looking forward to the eternal world is not, as some modern people think, a form of escapism or wishful thinking, but it is one of the things a Christian is meant to do. We are meant to have hope. We are meant to look forward. It is part of who we are as we live our lives following God. We have assurance. We have hope. So we can breathe easier. And there's some real practical things that this will mean for us as we live out our lives. Here's what it means. It means we don't always have to win. It means we don't always have to give up. It means that we don't have to brood over earthly ideas or wonder what's wrong with us if we don't fit in, or wonder if we're lovable enough, or if we're good enough, or if we matter enough. We don't need to worry about those things. The other things we can do, what does hope do as it matters to us in our kingdom? It should change our whole attitudes, our whole actions, our behaviors, the worldview that we have, as we know that all of that is framed, that we are not meant for this place. So what can we do? Well, with hope, we can pursue the things we love with passion, but not with dogmatism, not with anger, because we know it'll ultimately work out. What it also means is that we can speak with conviction and we can speak with truth, but we don't have to be impatient. We don't have to be demanding, because God's got this. It also means that we can live with faith and love. We can build intentional relationships, intentional community. We can be with the ones we love, but we can also know that it is just a mere shadow of what God has prepared for us in eternity. And finally, what it means for us is that we can live with joy. We can live with joy in the midst of anything that we're encountering. Not necessarily a plaster on a happy face, but we have a joy and a peace that transcends our circumstances, transcends what's going on out there, because we have this gift of hope that God gives us. And that is a joyful, peaceful, hopeful message for us this morning. And what a better way to celebrate the hope that we have in the Lord than through the gift of communion.